Welcome to the Vikings Now by Chat Sports. My name is Patrick Siepman, and coming up on today's show, did the Minnesota Vikings interim GM Rob Brzezinski leak their draft plans at pick number 18? Hit an interesting quote over the weekend, so I want to dive into that. And then also, Alec Lewis, beat reporter for The Athletic, had an update on the Vikings' plans with Jonathan Greenard. Looks like a trade won't happen, but it could go down on draft day. So we'll discuss that coming up on today's show, but we are now officially 17 days away from the 2026 NFL Draft. I'm super excited with the Vikes having 4 picks in the top 100. They have a lot of holes to fill on their roster, and it's very, very intriguing to see where they will go. So if you guys are fired up, hit me with those skulls down below in the comment section. Light it up for me, and just type those skulls if you're fired up for the NFL Draft. All right, Rob Brzezinski was talking about the Vikings draft plans, and I thought his insight here was pretty telling. He says, I think it's the biggest reason why a lot of players fail in this business. You force a need. And for a lot of reasons, it doesn't work out, and you pass on a player of higher ability for a position of need. It may be old school, but if you get your board set right and look for the best player available, I think it's going to lead you down the right path. So immediately when I think of, drafting BPA, I think the number one draft class we have seen in recent memory that really spoke to a team just flat out going BPA was our own division rival, the Detroit Lions. In 2023, they completely reset their franchise. Like, they had a generational draft class in 2023. And, if you guys remember the first round after night one, everybody was saying, well, what the hell did the Lions do? You have 2 picks in the top 18. You took the second best running back. You took the second best linebacker. A lot of people weren't a fan of what the Lions had to do, but you took Jahmyr Gibbs. He ends up being one of the best running backs in the NFL. Jack Campbell just made first-team All-Pro this past season. And then even in round 2, 4 picks in top 45, you took Sam Laporta, a really good tight end out of Iowa, and then Brian Branch, a great BPA pick for this team. And all 4 of these selections ended up working out, and that's how you change a team with just one singular draft class. So now let's connect it back here to the Minnesota Vikings. Who would be considered the BPA pick at number 18? Because obviously the Vikings have a need at corner, they have a need at safety, but they could just flat out take whoever the best player is at that whatever position here in 2026 at pick 18. So let's dive into it. Let's start off here with one of my favorite players in this year's draft class. I would have him top 5 on my big board, and that being Jordyn Tyson, Arizona State wide receiver. Now, Jordyn Tyson, he really does remind me of a Justin Jefferson, Stephon Diggs, wide receiver, where his long strides when he's running these routes, he really bends them off very similar to Jefferson. I forget who, I think it was KJ Osborne recently, was talking about how Jefferson runs his routes, and normally how normal wide receivers who aren't built like Jefferson is, like if he's running like a 7-yard dig route, for example, he'll have about 5 strides, but Jefferson with his long strides is about 3, and that's the same thing can be said about Jordyn Tyson. And if you were to draft him, like, you would create the best wide receiver trio in the NFL and possibly in NFL history. Like, that's how big I am on Jordyn Tyson. I think he's got wide receiver 1 potential in the NFL, and I would prefer Tyson over a guy like Carnell Tate or Mekhi Lemon, because Carnell Tate necessarily just play outside. Mekhi Lemon would just play in the slot. And when you have Addison and Jefferson, 2 wide receivers who can play both inside and outside, you could potentially have 3 wide receivers who can play every single position out there. If you do draft Jordyn Tyson in this past season, he was fantastic. You throw on his tape at Arizona State from just 2025. It is very, very encouraging about him and his game translating to the next level. Now, the biggest concern around Jordyn Tyson, why he could potentially be there at pick number 18, is his injury history. And it's, lengthy, and it's definitely a concern. Like, it would be naive to just ignore this when evaluating Jordyn Tyson. But in 2022, tore his knee up. ACL, MCL, and PCL tear. Fractured his collarbone first year at Arizona State. Then he also was dealing with a nagging hamstring injury this past year in 2025, and especially when you have a hamstring. I mean, we've even seen it with a guy like Justin Jefferson as of lately. It can be something that can linger, even if you get that thing fully rehabbed, fully recovered, and you feel like you're at 100%. Dealing with a hammy is a mother effort. So Tyson, I really like him. If he's the pick at 18, I will be very, very excited. And he's a guy that I got top 5 on my board. I think he's a fantastic wide receiver. I think he's the best wide receiver in this year's class. And I always think, like, what would Brad Holmes of the Detroit Lions do? If Tyson's on the board at 18, he would just flat out take him. And the same could be said about Oregon tight end Kenyon Sadiq. Now, we were very high on Sadiq before free agency started for the Minnesota Vikings because I thought they were going to let go of TJ Hawkinson. But the Vikings don't have a long-term answer at tight end. Hawk reconstructed his deal. He's not necessarily a 1-year, $10 million contract, but you don't have a future tight end in this organization. Now, if you think Kenyon Sadique can be that, you should take him at pick 18. He kind of reminds me of Vernon Davis a little bit, a very, very athletic tight end who can separate at a decent level. Now, if I had some concerns about Sadiq, drops were definitely an issue this past season. Had 6 drops in 14 games, and he wasn't as explosive as you would have thought with his athletic ability. I don't think he had a catch over 30 yards this past year. And also with Oregon, they didn't have that dominant wide receiver one or dominant pass catcher whatsoever. I thought his production would have been a lot higher than what he put out there, but still 560 yards, 51 catches, gotten better every single year. And apparently this guy blew people away during his combine meetings at the NFL Scouting Combine. Very intelligent kid, really good head on his shoulders, and his 40-yard dash is 4.39. I mean, that's ridiculous. The best out of any tight end in this year's class. Almost a 44-inch vertical leap. So if you just want to bank on the athlete and bank on a guy who you think's going to get better, he'll sure up his drops, he'll become a better route runner, and he's also a tight end. You go look at his tape at Oregon, they threw him tunnel screens left and right, which is something in the Kevin O'Connell offense. We've seen him throw a lot of screens to DJ Hawkinson, even Josh Oliver, and if you just want a better athlete with the ball in his hands, Kenyon Sadique would fit that bill. Now, what if the Vikings decide to go edge rusher? Let's just say they have Keldric Faulk up there high on their draft board. I think he could be in play for the Minnesota Vikings at pick 18. Now, he is a prototypical hand-in-the-dirt guy. Really good size, though, 6'5", about 280-ish pounds. And with that size, he ran a 4.87 40-yard dash, which is unbelievable. He also has a really solid vertical leap as well, 35 inches, so I like the explosive ability. His 10-yard split a little slower than I would have liked. Once he gets going, he can really move well. Now, his production is definitely a concern for me. Like, only at 30 pressures, 2 sacks this past season. He's more of a developmental prospect, but if you trust how the Vikings were able to develop guys like Jalen Redmond, Dallas Turner, even in year 2, really showing some bright spots at that edge position, like Keldric Faulk could be on the table. And if you think, like, hey, Dallas Turner or Jonathan Greenard, Andrew Van Ginkel getting older, maybe they're not with this Vikings organization, for the next 3+ seasons, and you want to have a duo of Keldric Faulk and Dallas Turner, he could be an interesting option for the Vikings at 18. But you guys let me know, would you draft an edge rusher at pick number 18? You guys let me know your thoughts down below in the comments section. I'll do it. If you believe he is the best player on the board, you take him. So give me a D for draft or give me a P for pass. Now, another guy at pick number 18, Kaden Proctor, offensive tackle from Alabama. Now, before the season, Kaden Proctor was going to be an undisputed top 10 pick. This past year, he was okay. Big body, moves very well. I mean, Bama was talking about throwing a guy tunnel screens. Bama was throwing this guy screens this past season. And he's a guy, very solid PFF grades, 85.2 overall, pass block 81.9. Run block 81.6, sacks allowed 2, penalties that only had 2 allowed. But Kaden Proctor moves very well here, and I think he could also be a guy, like, if you're looking for a potential Brian O'Neill replacement for the future, I think he feels more comfortable at right tackle compared to left. And if you would have Proctor, Darrisaw as your future tackle combo, I would have some interest there. And plus, Darrisaw, like this past year, I love CD. But he also played some bad football when he was out there, at least just up to his standards. So maybe the Vikings view offensive tackle as more of a position of need even than most people think. But if he's high up on your draft board and he's there at 18, again, you take him. Now, I think the definition, out of all these guys, the definition of a BPA pick for the Minnesota Vikings would be Jacob Rodriguez. Now, you could also make the argument for Sadiq and Tyson as well. But Jacob Rodriguez, linebacker out of Texas Tech, this guy was one of the most dominant college football players this past season. And if you got a top 20 grade on him, and even though you're taking an off-ball linebacker, probably the second or third in this year's class at 18, it sounds a little crazy, but what if this is your Jack Campbell pick? Both taken at pick number 18. Very similar athletic profiles as well, very similar production in college. There is some translations there about how that would work at the NFL, and he had a ridiculous scouting combine. The biggest concern about him was how is he going to test? Well, he tested fantastic. 40-yard dash of 4.57. Really good 10-yard split as well. Good vertical leap. So he's a good athlete. And then the production looks like if you were playing Madden, my player mode or college football my player mode, and you had a 5-star linebacker going to Texas Tech, 128 tackles, 11 TFLs, 10 PBUs, 4 INTs, 7 forced fumbles, had a touchdown. Like, just ridiculous production from Rodriguez. Now, there's no doubt. Jacob Rodriguez, if the Vikings did decide to take him at pick number 18, it would be a reach. Like, a lot of people would probably get up on there the next morning, Friday morning after the NFL draft. They would probably rip the Minnesota Vikings a little bit, be like, you took the third best off-ball linebacker, the second best off-ball linebacker, where you have him ranked at pick number 18, a top 20 pick, with not necessarily a huge position of need on the roster. With you bring back Eric Wilson, you still got Blake Cashman. But if you think he's a top 20 player in this class and you can almost stamp that he will be productive at the next level, I would be down to take him, because this is a guy, a very intelligent football player as well. He could take the green dot from Cashman in the future. He's good at setting his defense up right before the snap, so I think him and Flores would have a good connection and good rhythm there. But pick 18 would be rich. But for a guy like Jacob Rodriguez, I'm a massive fan of him. If he's there at 18 and you don't love maybe a corner, or maybe you don't love a safety that's on the board, I would really, really consider Jacob Rodriguez. I think it'd be a good fit for this Vikings defense. Now let's talk about Jonathan Greenard here. So Alec Lewis, writing up a recent article, said if a Jonathan Greenard trade were to go down, it would likely be during or after the NFL draft. So we probably won't see any more Jonathan Greenard updates until the draft, or obviously after. And the way it's shaken out right now, I would expect Jonathan Greenard to remain a Minnesota Viking. I think they were trying to trade Greenard earlier this offseason, one, for the financial flexibility. The Vikings really strapped for cap heading into free agency, able to get under it with, cutting guys like Aaron Jones, or restructuring Jones, restructuring Hockenson, cutting Allen, cutting Hargrave. So they were able to make it work financially. And I thought, maybe they could have traded Greenard, saved around $20 million. But with the deal he's on of making $22 million over the next 2 seasons each, that's a pretty damn good deal for still a top 15 bona fide edge rusher. And listen, you could make the argument like, hey, if they get a second-round pick for Greenard, you should probably consider taking it. But I've kept my asking price at a first-round pick for Greenard because he's in the prime of his NFL career. He was fantastic last season, even though the sack production wasn't up there compared to the prior 2 seasons where he was averaging 13 sacks a season. But he's a guy where if the Vikings want to go on a deep playoff run, you need 2 elite edge rushers. You want him next to Dallas Turner. Van Ginkel kind of playing that star hybrid role. I would have every interest in keeping 58 on the Minnesota Vikings. But you guys let me know, would you trade Greenard for a second-round pick? Give me a T for trade. Give me a P for pass. Personally, I would not. But if the Vikings did do it, it's not like I would kill him for it. Second-round pick is extremely valuable. But then you got to hit on that second-round pick. And then edge rusher becomes a sneaky high position need for this Minnesota Vikings if you're going to move off him. But you guys chime in for me. Catch you guys next time. Skol Vikes.